What if I told you there exists a seed that carries more protein than chicken meat, that thrives in extreme heat capable of turning corn into dry dust, that grows with almost no water, and that for 5,000 years was the engine of entire civilizations in the hottest deserts on Earth? Well, while you struggle to grow a little tomato in the backyard watering every day, this seed survived months without a drop of rain feeding entire peoples. And here comes the part that will make you angry. In less than a century, we erased it completely from history. We replaced it with weaker crops, buried its name, let it disappear from our fields as if it had never existed. But beneath the soil, something was waiting patiently. It didn't die, it slept. This is the story of the crop we threw away just before we desperately needed it. While the world spends billions looking for drought-resistant seeds, while scientists work in laboratories trying to genetically modify plants to withstand the heat, the answer has always been there, waiting in the desert for 5,000 years. This seed was domesticated in a single brilliant discovery in the Sonoran Desert by peoples who had no written language but possessed a wisdom we have completely lost. In a land where survival meant choosing carefully what to plant first, they chose this bean before even grain, the basic seed. Not out of sentimentality, not out of tradition, but out of pure survival. This bean was engineered by evolution with a single purpose: to live where absolutely nothing else can. And when the rains failed year after year, when other foods died in the unbearable heat, this bean kept producing, kept feeding, kept saving lives. But then came the European colonizers and decided that this was too wild, too uncontrollable, too dangerous, because it didn't depend on anyone to grow. They burned the fields, replaced them with wheat that needed constant irrigation, that needed control, that created dependency. And decades later came the mechanization of agriculture, the giant machines, the industrial monocultures that only work with uniform and predictable crops. This bean matured at different times, needed to be harvested by hand, didn't fit the system. So they simply decided it had no place in the modern world anymore. In just 20 years, a crop that sustained 5,000 years of civilization disappeared almost completely. But some families refused to forget, kept seeds in old trunks, in clay pots hidden in basements, waiting for the moment when the world would need it again. But before I show you everything about this forgotten superfood, I need you to leave a like now, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell because this kind of knowledge needs to reach more people. And look, in the comments, I want you to write where you are watching from and if you already knew this bean before this video. I want to see how many people know this incredible story that was purposely erased from the books. Let's together rescue this ancestral knowledge. This is the tipari bean, scientifically known as Phaseolus acutafolius, and it was literally built by evolution with a single goal: to live where nothing else can even dream of surviving. Its genome is an impressive biological fortress. It produces special amino sugars that prevent protein breakdown even when the air temperature reaches 48 degrees Celsius, 118 degrees, a heat that literally cooks other living plants. When the rains fail completely and the soil turns to dust, its leaves fold up during the day to save every drop of water, opening only at night when the air is cooler and evaporation is lower. And there's more. It fixes nitrogen directly from the air, healing dead soils that were exhausted by other crops, leaving the land better than it was before. And now comes the data that will blow your mind. It produces more protein per gram than chicken meat, reaching an incredible 25 grams of protein for every 100 grams of beans. That's more protein than you find in most meats, and all growing naturally in the middle of the desert without needing expensive feed, without antibiotics, without anything but scorching sun and occasional rain. The Tohono O'odham people called it tapawi, which simply means it's a bean, but their oral tradition tells a much deeper and more beautiful story. They say that the Milky Way is not made of stars shining in the sky, but of white tipari beans scattered across the night. That is the abundance this bean represented for them, so common, so essential, that it filled even the sky of their mythology. 1,000 years ago, the Hohokam people were cultivating this bean throughout the Arizona region, using a method that completely defies the logic of modern agriculture we learn in books. They planted in Chin, which are dry washes in the desert that flooded briefly during monsoon rains. While modern farmers spend fortunes on complex irrigation systems, these ancient peoples built simple diversion structures made of branches and bushes to capture the flash floods coming down from the mountains. The beans germinated with a single heavy rain and matured completely in just 60 days. Two monsoon rains per year, a complete harvest guaranteed, in regions where annual rainfall was a meager 7 centimeters, under 3 inches per year, where you can barely keep a succulent alive, the tepary bean still produced abundantly. Now listen to this. In the 1920s, Tohono O'odham farmers were growing 680,000 kilograms, 1.5 million lbs of tepary beans per year. 680,000 kilograms. They traded throughout the American Southwest, a gigantic trade network connecting Arizona, Sonora in Mexico, and the Great Plains. This bean sustained entire communities through prolonged droughts, through devastating famines, through impossible heats that killed any other crop. And it wasn't just physical sustenance, it kept these people incredibly healthy too. Before the arrival of industrialized processed foods, the Tohono O'odham people had practically no cases of type 2 diabetes, a disease that today devastates entire indigenous communities. Their traditional diet of tepary beans, mesquite pods, and cholla buds kept cholesterol healthy and blood sugar naturally balanced without needing any medicine. The tepary bean was the key piece of this extraordinary health because its soluble fiber slows down digestion, preventing blood glucose spikes. The low glycemic index made it ideal for long-term metabolic health. Modern research would later confirm something even more extraordinary and surprising. Tepary beans contain protease inhibitors that provenly inhibit the growth of certain cancer cells in laboratory studies. This wasn't just food filling bellies, it was preventive medicine growing freely in the desert sand without needing a pharmacy, without needing a doctor. So how the hell did such a powerful, so perfect, so abundant crop simply disappear from the face of the earth? It wasn't nature that killed the tepary, my friend. It was ideology. It was greed. It was control. The government started giving money to farmers to plant corn, soy, cotton, those things big companies wanted. Meanwhile, the bean that had fed families for thousands of years was simply forgotten as if it had never existed. By the 1950s, almost no one planted tepary anymore. Just imagine, a plant that had traversed 5,000 years of history disappeared in just 20 years because it didn't serve the interests of big farms. But do you know what happened? Some grandmas, some stubborn families, simply refused to let this story die. They kept the seeds like someone keeps a family jewel. There was a lady named Ramona Button who found some black tepary beans stored in an old trunkway in the back of the house. Those seeds had been kept by her grandmother, who had received them from her grandmother, and so on. They were passed from mother to daughter with that care of someone who knows they are guarding something precious. They stayed in clay pots, hidden in the basement, wrapped in old cloth, with little notes saying how to plant. The seeds stayed there quietly, waiting, as if they knew that one day the world would need them again. And it really did. In the 1970s, a fierce drought came that wiped out everything. The soy everyone planted died. The corn that was the apple of agriculture's eye couldn't handle the heat, got roasted on the stalk. Even the wheat, the one Europeans brought saying it was better than everything, started to falter in the strong sun. Farmers were desperate, seeing their crops die, losing money, not knowing what to do. That was when some researchers started looking at the bush, at the plants growing alone in the desert. And do you know what they found? A little plant with little white flowers growing beautifully in the middle of the hellish heat, strong as if nothing were happening. They decided to test it on some patches of land near Tucson. They gave almost no water at all, just the rain that fell naturally. And what happened? The plant produced a hell of a lot of beans. It was the tepary, alive and strong after almost disappearing from the map. And there's more. When they measured the land after the harvest, it was better than before. The bean not only grew without help, but it also left the soil richer. One of the scientists looked at that and said, "This is a gift the past is giving to the future." And it really was. But then comes the part that makes anyone angry. Even with all this proof that the bean worked, that it was strong, that it solved problems, the system simply didn't want to know about it. Do you know why? Because you couldn't put a patent on it. You couldn't genetically modify it and sell it as a novelty. You couldn't sell expensive fertilizer along with it because it didn't need it. You couldn't control who planted, where they planted, how they planted. The beans simply grew alone, free, the way nature made it to be, and in a system that only works when you depend on someone to buy seed, fertilizer, poison. This bean was a problem. Agriculture magazines wrote that it wasn't suitable for commercial production, even with scientific studies praising its strength against the climate, against drought. When it came time to sell to the market, they said it was no good. Translation, it didn't make a profit for big companies. And when the choice is between profit and survival, profit always wins. Always. But there were people who didn't accept that. Around 1996, a group of people from the Tohono O'odham community created an organization called TOCA. They started looking for the old seeds with the old folks, with the grandmas, in the forgotten pots in the back of houses. Closing today, while the world spends billions looking for seeds that can withstand heat and drought, the answer has been there in the desert for 5,000 years waiting. Climate models warn that by 2050, we will lose 30% of food production due to heat. But the tepary has already lived through worse. It was born of heat, grew where corn and soy die roasted. Scientists now call it America's survival crop. In 2019, tests in Arizona and Mexico confirmed what desert farmers always knew. Tepary uses a third of the water of soy and produces almost the same protein. That means it can feed families where rain barely touches the ground. Research centers in Colombia are testing crossing tepary with common beans to make them more resistant. Governments have started testing it in food security programs. But the real movement is coming from indigenous farmers. They don't see this as a plant, they see it as a bridge between the past and the uncertain future of the planet. As an old man told researchers, we plant it because it remembers how to live when everything forgets. The story of the tepary is not about rediscovery, it is about recognition. The knowledge was never lost, just ignored. And now, while the world desperately searches for drought-proof seeds, the answer has always been there. The bean that dressed itself in scarcity, that fed in the heat, that survived missions, mechanization, corporations trying to erase it, it never stopped offering its gifts. It just waited for us to remember. This knowledge is not lost. It is buried in every seed, in every pod, in every harvest. The culture they called backward may be the future of survival. All it asks is that we look beyond profit and see what has always been there, resilience growing in the sand. If this story touched you in any way, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share with someone who needs to know this. In the comments, write where you are watching from, and if you already knew the tepary bean. Let's spread this knowledge that was hidden for so long. Thank you very much for staying until the end, and see you in the next video where we will continue rescuing forgotten wisdoms.